Today, I'm going to prove that the collective consciousness exists. I know, it sounds like a really fantastical claim, but not really. If you think about the alternatives, not really. Because if you think about it, there are really only a few alternatives, a few possible alternatives. Now, the collective consciousness is regarding consciousness. It's an ontological position regarding consciousness. And because of that, there are three alternatives, three ontological alternatives regarding consciousness. Collective consciousness, meaning Panpsychism, that's the monist view of consciousness. The idealist view, for instance, would be that you are like God or something, and you are dreaming up this entire universe. And the word for that is solipsism. So that's idealism, and that's one alternative. Maybe you believe that, I don't know. The other alternative is dualism. Now, what dualists think regarding consciousness is that there's a separation between your consciousness and your body. So what that means is that, well, for example, if you were to die, then your consciousness substance would leave your body and end up somewhere else. Now, that could apply to something like simulation theory, where, not like the movie Matrix, where if you die in real life, but if you die, then you wake up in the real world because you were actually just in a simulation. That would be a dualist point of view. Another dualist point of view is the postmodern Christian or any other kind of postmodern take on religion, where a recent invention, which isn't in any real religious text, is this dimension or place that a spirit travels to after you die, like up in the clouds or something. None of that is in the Bible, but people think of it that way, and that view is like a dualist view. So that's the second alternative. The third alternative to consciousness is the physicalist point of view. So the idea is that physicalism views the physical category as the base category, and everything else is a subset of the physical category, or a construct of it. So your consciousness in that instance is a subset of the physical, and that's where it ends. It's the word they use for it is emergence. So if you ask a physicalist, well, why are you conscious? They'll say, well, the brain is really complicated, it's complex, and due to a certain level of complexity, or you know, as materials, physical materials get more and more complex, somewhere along the line, consciousness emerges from the amount of complexity. Of course, the amount of complexity is unknown, and what the word complexity means is not known. It's not defined. it's like it's not really any better than the idealist point of view, because you ask, well, how can you figure out if anything else is conscious? See, this is what idealists say. This is their argument. Well, how do you figure out if anything else is conscious? I don't know if you're conscious. You don't know if I'm conscious. You could just be a zombie, a philosophical zombie. So that's an idealist's argument against physicalism. And it's a good argument. It basically just shows that there are logical problems with physicalism. To say that, oh well, let's just look at science and then wait to see what we learn about the physical structure, and then we'll finally figure out consciousness. Well, that whole time you're not just being neutral. You're not just being neutral. You're not just being unbiased. You are believing in one of the four, most likely physicalism. It is not possible for a person to be neutral in this aspect. So those are your four options. I challenge you to try and think up a version of consciousness that no one else has thought of, that is not in one of these four. I can guarantee you it's going to be in one of the four. It's going to be very similar to one of those four. So, where are we at right now? Where we're at is that a lot of smart people realize that the physicalist view of consciousness is really dumb. There's a lot of problems with it. Dave Chalmers, good old Dave, partially due to Chalmers' question or the hard problem, the hard problem of consciousness, brought to us mainly by Dave Chalmers. That has helped spark new conversation about consciousness. The hard problem is essentially, well, it is directed at physicalism. Specifically, it's directed at physicalism. The hard problem is, name the physical process that consciousness emerges from. The physical process, the mechanism, the physical mechanism. And that's a hard problem. A lot of people say, well, that's like a non-issue because, if you have that argument, you really have to understand the ontological point of that argument. So basically, in all of these four ontological perspectives, they're based on the relationship, the possible relationship between two categories. Usually we call the categories physical and non-physical. Physicalists explain the non-physical category by saying that it's a subset of the physical category, but they can't explain the physical category except to say that it's like a subset of itself, which leads to infinite regress. And the only reason that's a problem is because we want to understand things. We want to explain and understand things. The data isn't affected at all by your ontological perspective, but your analysis, the words that you use, and your understanding is totally affected by that. And that's really why you talk about this stuff, is because well, anyway, the hard problem, basically, it's just saying, well, explain the physical category, and you can't. And so that's really what the hard problem is. But the hard problem, it applies to the other ontological perspectives as well, For example, in the 1700s, Rene Descartes came up with this idea called substance dualism, and there was a problem with it. Basically, the problem was, well, okay, the substance, the consciousness substance explains the physical stuff. But the issue was, well, now explain the non-physical. And then Spinoza came out and evoked the monist God, and basically gave the exact same arguments that I'm giving right now, and he proved that the collective consciousness exists. And back then, Christians believed in the collective consciousness. For most of Christian history, the collective consciousness was a thing. It's only until very recently that's like, well, that's Satan or something. Nah. There's passage, angels and demons. That's referring to the collective consciousness. Stuff like that. It's very monist. Okay. It's very monist. So that the hard problem applies to dualism. It applies to physicalism, and also idealism as well. Oh, this freaking fly. The hard problem can be applied to idealism as well, because idealists can explain the physical by saying, well, consciousness is the base substance and it creates the physical. Just like dualism, it's the exact same problem. The only difference, though, is that idealists say that physical is a subset of the non-physical category, and therefore is a construct. It doesn't really exist. So that's the difference between idealism and dualism. And the hard problem applies to that too. You could say to the idealist, okay, well, what non-physical mechanism, causes the physical to emerge? It works both ways. It's amazing. And really, the solution to the hard problem is monism. Now, the way that consciousness would have to be a non-physical characteristic of all matter, and it would have to combine somehow to make up your consciousness, because you're made out of a lot of physical units. So how is it that you have a single consciousness and not a whole bunch of little consciousnesses? This innate characteristic must somehow combine together. I don't know. So a lot of smart people have tried to answer this, what's called combination problem of panpsychism. And the way they've done that basically is, well, you have this innate characteristic of all matter, and it combines somehow. So hypothetically, if that were to exist, if we were to discover that hypothetically, then how would that mechanism work? And they talk about hypothetically how it would combine, and and they give it names, synonyms for combine, like fuse or constitute, stuff like that. A lot of different. There's a lot of different ones. They call it different names, synonyms for combine. All right, so that's great. It's kind of like, well, hypothetically, maybe in the future, in the distant future, with the help of science, breakthrough in science, we'll discover new things about reality. Turns out that we're actually really good at science. We already know a lot about reality and collected a lot of data. And it turns out that there are non-physical characteristics that are innate to all matter. And those non-physical characteristics combine in such a way to make larger chunks of that characteristic. For example, you have magnetism. Simple analogy, magnet here, magnet there, put them together, now they're one magnet. Okay? Why does that happen? Well, there's a word for it. It's called coherence. There's already a word for it. It's called coherence. We already know about coherence. I didn't make it up just now. Coherence has been known for a long time. And, they've tried to understand how spin works. It's not really that difficult. Put a magnet on the ground, throw another magnet at it. Guess what happens? The magnets really quickly align and snap together and make a single magnet. Attraction. Combination. It already exists. It's not a hypothetical thing that, maybe, it already exists. And then you might say something like, consciousness is like a non-fit, like it's experiences. It's not like a physical force, whereas magnetism is like a physical force. Well, I actually think consciousness is a physical force. I do. You take something like a sweet substance and you put it near a receptor, and all of a sudden there's some kind of combination going on there, and all of a sudden you experience sweetness. Now, why does that happen? Why is it that your receptor physically attracts this physical molecule, the sweet molecule? Why does that happen? Well, it's a chemical reaction, obviously. How do chemical reactions happen? Yeah. People these days, I know the name for it, so I'm smarter than you. Okay, well, it's great that you can name things. I put a name to it. Doesn't mean you understand it. Doesn't mean you know a damn thing about it. So there's these things called chemical reactions. What's a chemical reaction? It's coherence. Okay. What's gravity? It's coherence. What's magnetism? Coherence. Electricity? Coherence. A laser? Coherence. It's not a hypothetical thing. It already exists. Now, really, the only thing left to do is to identify exactly what the force is that leads to consciousness. And I don't think it's that far off, the technology. I think pretty soon, probably within my lifetime, we'll be figuring out how to alter consciousness with machines that are designed to do that, to alter the fields, the consciousness fields, manipulate them. Maybe I envision something simple like you walk through a doorway and you experience the sensation of sweetness, but you didn't. Nothing went into your mouth, or you didn't smell any. There weren't particles that you were smelling or anything. Just from the device in the doorway, it interacted with your consciousness field. And I envision stuff like that. Of course, you could take that and just run with it. And another thing I'd like to add is that the concept, the general concept of an electromagnet that involves a solenoid and something like an iron rod, some kind of special material that's picked out specifically for your task, or like how you want to manipulate the fields. You can turn it on, you can turn it off. Depending on the material, it could stay magnetized, or every material has different qualities, and it's just dependent upon the structure. All of these characteristics are innate to all matter. It's just every element, every molecule has different specific characteristics, and how you deal with those fields, how it deals with the fields. So really, the task is figure out what materials are cohesive to consciousness fields, and that's easy. You already have certain materials used by. Your brain doesn't have iron in it, so what gives? There's certain, like, you could say biological materials, but what's special about biological materials? It's just different elements put together. There's probably other materials out there that are cohesive to consciousness fields, but. So yeah, that's basically the task. Figure out the materials, figure out how to alter their consciousness coherence. Now, in the case of like solenoid, if you do loops in like a cylindrical fashion, you already know the direction in which because of the polarity of the electric field, you know which direction the electric field will mess with the like, let's say, the iron core. It's going to be that in that direction there. It's orthogonal, and I don't think it would necessarily be as easy to put like a sweet material inside of like a solenoid. Of course, I'm going to try that, but I don't know if that would work. I think it's the polarity. I think the particular characteristic is just different polarities of the same force. Because really, electricity is just the exact same thing as magnetism, just at a polarity that's 90 degrees. So it's just a different polarity. It's exactly the same thing. It's just a different polarity. So you have in between 90 degrees and 0 degrees to mess with. So I think there might be a continuum of different forces between 0 and 90 degrees. And I'm pretty sure that some variants, polarity variants of electromagnetism have been studied. I have to get into that more, but yeah, it's like, basically it's, we're past the point of, oh well, if you believe in the collective, like, you're dumb, you must be dumb. Like, no, we're past that, okay? Because there are alternatives. There are 3 alternatives that just are very illogical and don't explain anything. Whereas collective consciousness, and when I say, oh, the collective consciousness exists, I'm not saying, oh, supernatural. No, I'm not claiming that there's anything out there that we don't know about already. I'm just the word and the discussion. It doesn't change the data. it just changes our way of thinking about things. And if it is a collective consciousness, it's just because we figure out, oh, there's collective consciousness, doesn't mean like things will change. No, if you think of it as anything more than just a natural, mundane force, then you're crazy. You're really just you're on you're on drugs. And it's conceivable that 50 years from now, school children will be like, oh my gosh, they used to think that the collective consciousness didn't exist. Wow, they're really dumb. It could just be a mundane thing, like everyone knew that. Duh, you didn't know that? It's not like a paradigm changing thing. It's like, it's just, well, that explains that. Okay. You get it.